If you're here, chances are you've either lived this connection, witnessed it closely, or you're trying to make sense of why it felt so intense, yet so unpredictable. The Aquarius woman and Scorpio man pairing is one of those dynamics people can't seem to agree on. For some, it's magnetic and unforgettable, and for others, it's confusing, frustrating, or emotionally destabilizing. There's rarely a neutral experience with this one. What's interesting is that in many cases, the Scorpio man is usually the one who notices first. He's the one watching from a distance, clocking her energy, studying her patterns, quietly trying to figure her out. The Aquarius woman isn't typically doing anything overt. She's just existing in her own lane, detached, self contained, mentally elsewhere. And that's often exactly what catches his attention. Scorpio men are highly perceptive, but Aquarius women don't give away emotional tells in the way Scorpio expects. There's no obvious vulnerability, no emotional performance, no clear signal to latch onto. Instead, there's distance, independence, and a sense that she doesn't need to be seen, which paradoxically makes him want to see her more. This is where the intrigue begins and also where the problems start. Because once Scorpio becomes emotionally invested, he seeks depth, emotional reciprocity, and a sense of energetic fusion. Aquarius, on the other hand, values autonomy, objectivity, and space, especially when things start to feel intense or consuming. What feels like mystery and challenge in the beginning can quickly turn into misunderstanding and power struggles if neither person understands what's actually happening beneath the surface. And this is why outcomes with this pairing are so mixed. Some people describe it as intellectually stimulating and transformative. Others describe it as emotionally mismatched, ungrounded, or impossible to sustain long term. The truth is, this connection is highly conditional and far more dependent on individual charts, emotional maturity, and power dynamics than most people realize. In this video, we're going to break down why this connection is so conditional, the underlying dynamics at play, and what actually determines whether this pairing thrives or quietly falls apart. If you've ever felt confused by this connection, you're not imagining it. Chapter 1, Fixed versus Fixed. Why neither bends easily. One of the most important things to understand about the Aquarius woman and Scorpio man dynamic is that both are fixed signs. This alone explains why the connection feels intense, stubborn, and at times impossible to move forward once friction sets in. Fixed energy doesn't like change, doesn't pivot easily, and doesn't adapt quickly under pressure. But what makes this pairing especially complicated is that they're fixed in completely different realms. Aquarius is fixed air. Her rigidity lives in her mind, her beliefs, her worldview, and her sense of personal autonomy. Once she's decided how she sees something, it's very hard to sway her emotionally. Scorpio, on the other hand, is fixed water. His rigidity lives in his emotions, attachments, and psychological bonds. Once he's emotionally invested, he doesn't detach easily, he anchors. Early on, this contrast can feel complementary. Aquarius brings logic, perspective, and objectivity. Scorpio brings depth, focus, and emotional intensity. There's a sense that they offer each other what the other lacks. But when conflict arises, this same difference becomes the source of the standstill. Aquarius doesn't respond well to emotional pressure. When situations feel heavy, intense, or consuming, her instinct is to pull back and think. Scorpio interprets that pullback emotionally as distancing, withholding, or disengagement. Meanwhile, Scorpio responds to emotional threat by digging in deeper, wanting clarity, reassurance, and emotional presence. To Aquarius, this can feel invasive or controlling. Neither is trying to hurt the other, but neither naturally speaks the other's language. Because both are fixed, arguments don't feel like discussions, they feel like deadlocks. Aquarius isn't going to bend her need for space just to soothe emotional tension. A Scorpio isn't going to loosen his emotional grip just because she needs breathing room. Each believes they're protecting something essential. Aquarius protects freedom and self definition. Scorpio protects emotional truth and security. This is why people often describe this pairing as having no middle ground. When things are good, they're very good. When things are off, both retreat into their fixed positions, waiting for the other to move first, and neither does. Understanding this foundation is crucial because it explains why this connection can feel powerful but also frustratingly stagnant. It's not about incompatibility in the traditional sense, it's about two immovable forces meeting, each convinced their way of relating is the right one. And this fixed versus fixed tension sets the stage for everything else we're about to talk about. Chapter 2: Why Scorpio men usually notice and attach first. In many Aquarius woman Scorpio man connections, there's a clear pattern that shows up again and again. The Scorpio man is usually the one who notices first. He's the one observing, tracking, and slowly becoming emotionally invested, often before the Aquarius woman even realizes anything significant is happening. This isn't accidental, it's rooted in how Scorpio and Aquarius naturally move through the world. Scorpio men are highly attuned to subtlety. They notice what others overlook, tone shifts, silences, emotional undercurrents. When an Aquarius woman enters the picture, she immediately stands out because she doesn't signal availability in obvious ways. She isn't emotive, she isn't performative, and she doesn't seek validation through emotional expression. She's self contained, mentally active, and often energetically distant. To Scorpio, this feels unusual and therefore compelling. What draws him in isn't flirtation or emotional openness, it's the lack of it. Aquarius doesn't chase, doesn't over explain herself, and doesn't react the way he expects. There's a sense that she's unreachable, or at least not easily influenced. For a Scorpio man, this triggers curiosity and challenge. He wants to understand her internal world, but she doesn't offer it up freely. While Scorpio is quietly watching and forming an attachment, Aquarius is often still operating from a neutral place. She may enjoy the conversation, the mental stimulation, or the presence, but she isn't immediately emotional about it. She's processing internally, not bonding externally. This creates an imbalance early on. Scorpio is already emotionally engaged, while Aquarius is still evaluating whether the connection even matters. As Scorpio's interest deepens, his attention becomes more focused, he remembers details, studies patterns, and becomes energetically invested. Aquarius may sense this intensity, but instead of leaning in emotionally, she often pulls back slightly to regain her internal balance. This is where confusion begins. Scorpio experiences her distance as mixed signals, while Aquarius experiences his intensity as premature. Neither is wrong, they're simply operating on different timelines. This early dynamic matters because it sets the emotional tone of the relationship. Scorpio enters with emotional momentum. Aquarius enters with mental curiosity. If this imbalance isn't acknowledged, Scorpio can feel exposed or vulnerable, while Aquarius can feel pressured or watched. This is often the moment where the connection either stabilizes or starts its push pull cycle. And once that cycle begins, it becomes very hard to stop. Chapter 3: Emotional Depth versus Intellectual Detachment. At the core of the Aquarius woman and Scorpio man dynamic is a fundamental difference in how each experiences intimacy. Scorpio bonds through emotional depth while Aquarius connects through mental resonance. Both are valid, but when they collide without awareness, they create a persistent feeling of being out of sync. For Scorpio, emotional intimacy means immersion. He wants to feel chosen, prioritized, and emotionally intertwined. When he cares, he doesn't skim the surface. He goes all in. He seeks vulnerability, emotional honesty, and shared psychological space. Love for him is something that's felt deeply and lived intensely. Detachment feels unnatural to him once emotional investment has begun. Aquarius, on the other hand, doesn't experience closeness through emotional fusion. She bonds through conversation, shared ideas, humor, and mutual respect for individuality. Emotional distance doesn't mean lack of care. It's often how she maintains clarity and self regulation. When emotions become overwhelming or consuming, her instinct is to step back and analyze rather than merge. This is where misunderstanding takes root. Scorpio may feel that Aquarius keeps him at arm's length emotionally, even when there's clear chemistry or intellectual compatibility. He may interpret her calmness as indifference, her objectivity as emotional avoidance, and her need for space as rejection. The more he seeks emotional reassurance, the more she may withdraw, not because she doesn't care, but because the intensity feels destabilizing. Aquarius, meanwhile, can feel confused by Scorpio's emotional expectations. What he sees as closeness, she may experience as pressure. What he sees as vulnerability, she may experience as emotional weight. She may feel that no amount of explanation is enough because Scorpio wants emotional presence rather than logical reassurance. Both end up feeling misunderstood. Scorpio feels unseen emotionally. Aquarius feels unseen mentally. Scorpio wants emotional confirmation. Aquarius wants freedom to exist without constant emotional negotiation. Over time, this mismatch can create resentment, Scorpio feeling emotionally deprived, Aquarius feeling emotionally overwhelmed. This is why this pairing can feel so intense, yet so fragile. There's genuine attraction and fascination, but without conscious effort, they begin speaking different emotional languages. Scorpio dives deeper to secure the bond. Aquarius detaches further to preserve autonomy. Unless both recognize and respect these differences, the connection becomes a loop of pursuit and withdrawal, emotionally charged, mentally exhausting, and difficult to stabilize. This chapter explains why many people describe this pairing as meaningful, transformative, and ultimately unsustainable without growth on both sides. Chapter 4: Power, Control, and the Push Pull Dynamic. Once the Aquarius woman Scorpio man connection moves beyond initial attraction and emotional mismatch, it often enters a deeper, more complicated territory: power dynamics. This is where the relationship stops being just about compatibility and starts being about control versus freedom, often without either person consciously intending it. Scorpio men are not typically controlling in obvious, overt ways. Their desire for control is emotional and energetic. When Scorpio feels attached, he wants influence, access, and emotional proximity. He wants to know where he stands, how he matters, and whether the bond is secure. This need isn't about dominance as much as it is about emotional safety. However, to someone like Aquarius, that need can feel constraining. Aquarius women are fiercely protective of their autonomy. They resist being defined by relationships and don't like feeling emotionally claimed before they've consciously chosen it. The moment she senses expectation, obligation, or emotional leverage, her instinct is to pull back, not dramatically, quietly. She creates distance, not as punishment, but as self preservation. This is where the push pull dynamic takes shape. Scorpio leans in to regain emotional closeness. Aquarius steps back to restore balance. Scorpio intensifies his attention, presence, or emotional expression. Aquarius becomes cooler, more neutral, or less responsive. Each reaction triggers the other, creating a loop neither initially recognizes. What makes this dynamic especially exhausting is that both believe they're responding reasonably. Scorpio feels justified in seeking clarity and reassurance. Aquarius feels justified in protecting her freedom and emotional space. But over time, the pattern escalates. Scorpio may feel he's chasing something just out of reach. Aquarius may feel she's being watched, emotionally monitored, or subtly pressured. This is also where fixation can develop. Scorpio's focus sharpens when something feels unavailable or uncertain. Aquarius, sensing that intensity, may detach even further, reinforcing Scorpio's sense that something is unresolved. The connection becomes less about mutual enjoyment and more about regulating each other's reactions. If this dynamic isn't interrupted with conscious communication and strong boundaries, it can drain both people. Scorpio feels emotionally starved and powerless. Aquarius feels restricted and overstimulated. Without awareness, the relationship becomes a cycle of pursuit and resistance rather than mutual grounding. Chapter 5: Why the entire birth chart determines the outcome. By the time we reach this point, it should be clear why the Aquarius woman and Scorpio man connection can't be judged by sun signs alone. This pairing is one of the most chart dependent dynamics in astrology, and that's why experiences with it vary so wildly. Two people can have the same sun sign combination and live out completely different versions of this relationship. One of the biggest determining factors is the moon sign. The moon governs emotional needs, instincts, and how someone processes closeness. An Aquarius woman with water or earth moon placements may have a greater capacity to sit with emotional intensity without feeling overwhelmed. A Scorpio man with air or fire moon placements may express his emotions with more flexibility and less emotional pressure. These combinations soften the fixed versus fixed tension we talked about earlier. Venus placements matter just as much, if not more. Venus describes how someone gives and receives love. A Scorpio man with a more detached or intellectually oriented Venus may not require constant emotional fusion to feel secure. Likewise, an Aquarius woman with a Venus and a water sign may naturally offer more emotional warmth than her sun sign suggests. When Venus placements are compatible, much of the friction around attachment and detachment eases. Emotional maturity is another critical variable. An evolved Scorpio understands that intensity doesn't entitle him to access. He can sit with uncertainty without attempting to control it. An evolved Aquarius understands that emotional presence doesn't equal loss of freedom. She can remain open without feeling engulfed. When both people are self aware, the connection becomes less reactive and more intentional. Timing and life experience also play a role. If Scorpio is going through a period of emotional upheaval or insecurity, the pairing can feel volatile. If Aquarius is in a phase of radical independence or emotional detachment, she may have little tolerance for intensity. But when both are grounded, self regulated, and clear about boundaries, this connection can become surprisingly stable. This is why some Aquarius woman Scorpio man relationships are transformative and long lasting, while others feel unresolved and unfinished. It isn't that the pairing is doomed, it's that it demands more awareness than most. Understanding the full chart doesn't just explain what happened, it brings clarity, closure, and sometimes even peace. Closing The Aquarius woman and Scorpio man connection isn't confusing because it lacks meaning. It's confusing because it has too much of it without a natural framework to contain it. This pairing brings together two powerful fixed energies that value very different things. Scorpio seeks emotional depth, fusion, and certainty, while Aquarius prioritizes autonomy, perspective, and freedom of self. When those needs aren't consciously understood, the relationship can feel intense, destabilizing, or perpetually unresolved. What many people struggle with after experiencing this dynamic is the lingering sense of what if? What if the timing had been different? What if one of us had understood the other better? What if we'd met each other halfway? Those questions exist because the connection often stops before it fully finds its shape. It doesn't fade quietly, it pauses, suspended in tension. But intensity alone doesn't equal compatibility. Traction doesn't automatically translate into sustainability, and transformation doesn't always require permanence. Sometimes the purpose of a connection is to highlight internal patterns, control, detachment, emotional safety, freedom, rather than to last indefinitely. For those who found this pairing painful or confusing, it doesn't mean you failed or misread the connection. It means you encountered a dynamic that requires emotional awareness, communication, and self regulation at a level most relationships never ask for. And not everyone meets each other at that level at the same time. For those who made it work, it's usually because both people were willing to grow. Scorpio learning to release emotional control, Aquarius learning to stay present without disappearing. When that balance is achieved, this pairing can be grounding, transformative, and deeply respectful. Ultimately, this is not a good or bad match, it's a conditional one, and understanding that can bring clarity instead of confusion and peace instead of fixation. If you've experienced this connection, you're not alone and you're not imagining the complexity. It really is that layered.